Great. We are now recording. Hello. I am Jessica Pettit. Thank you very much for being on this webinar thing. I have permitted everyone to talk, but I'm going to ask that you mute your microphones just for background noise stuff. I am recording this, and whenever I get the recording, I will put it all over Facebook in case it's helpful to other people. But full disclosure to start off with, I am not a super techie person. I am not using a fancy web camera. I am not using a fancy microphone. I have a lamp there and I have a lamp there, and hopefully that'll work. Tao, I have been doing this for a really long time. I think maybe it's because it's on brand that I'm not a very techie person. I can get away with it. But what I thought I would do, oh, the chat says it's disabled. Oh, well, that's sad. Thank you for letting me know that. I'm breaking my own rules right now. Okay, well, I don't know how to fix it in the middle of it. Okay, so what I have done is I am doing and also showing what I am doing at the same time. So hopefully that will be acceptable. Let's check. Yes, I know you don't like doing this, but we're going to move slides. All right. So first off, you will notice that as you were doing this, there is a difference between Zoom meeting and Zoom webinar. I am learning slowly but surely which one I like better and when. This is actually the Zoom webinar platform versus the Zoom meeting platform. The way that I have heard these discussed differently, in case that's helpful, is Zoom meeting is Brady Bunch, everyone kind of sitting around a table, and the Zoom webinar platform is one person to many. So for example, Ted, like I've disabled the chat room because of some other webinars that I do, because I don't want the 4,000 people using the chat room at the exact same time. And I did not undisable it, and I don't know how to do that anyway. So the Zoom webinar platform that we are currently doing, when I have done this in the past, the panelists that you set up in the beginning, they can log in early. I learned yesterday they have a unique link because I gave that link to people on the webinar I was on yesterday, and then they all logged in as me. Whoops. So then the attendees are in a separate tab, and unlike Zoom meetings, they don't necessarily make a ding dong sound when they come in. So the first thing I recommend is logging in very early, because some of my clients, the participants will log in 30, 45 minutes early. If you set up what is called a practice session, then you can do some things and get things set up before you actually broadcast. But as soon as you broadcast, people will be there and will be able to see what you are doing. So I usually have some kind of animated screen like that flying unicorn, or I'll have music or something on in the background, but that means my microphone is on, but that way people can hear and see and know that they are in the right place. Mike and Claire, you just joined, but just so you know, talking is permitted whenever we do Q&A, but thank you for muting yourself. So noticing music, practice when you broadcast, also when you record, as soon as you hit broadcast, that's when the recording starts. So then like messing around and picking your nose ahead of time, you would do that before you broadcast. Good job. Okay, so in theory, when I first started doing webinars, I had no interest whatsoever in really doing this because I like to be engaging. I like to do things in person. I have a big training background. So 2 years ago, I ended up having surgery, and part of the recovery from the surgery was that I was supposed to lay down for 6 weeks. So I created these webinars, and what I want to share with you is how I have made them really engaging and really interactive, and gotten a ton of in-person spin-off business because I have these recordings available on my website and because of how I do a webinar. So I thought that I would share with everyone. Oh, great. Okay. So the first thing you may, let me back up one slide. So the first off, I had the flying unicorn as like, look, you're in the right place. Then I have the title slide that is the title. This one is goofy, of course, because I probably wouldn't do something as goofy as this with a client, but who knows, maybe. But you'll also notice that I have a texting number on it. So Ted, for example, who told me that the chat is disabled for this webinar, which I typically do because I can't keep track of this and the chat at the same time. I disable it, but I encourage everyone to use this texting number if you have questions or comments along the way. Then I have my cell phone set up over here, and that is a Google Voice number that goes directly to my cell phone. So then I can respond to those if needed. It just feels a little bit more controlled, and maybe it's because I'm so tech phobic or something. But anyway, so that's a good thing. The other thing is that you are recording it. And if you're giving the recording to the client, somebody's going to watch the recording and also can ask me questions. So before I move too deep in, I like to be able to say, like, if you're live or watching the recording, you are welcome to text this number. And then they get the real in-time experience of asking Q&A, even if they're watching the recording. Little stupid things, but it really does help. I should clarify too, Allison Graham did a webinar yesterday on making an online course. I'm not really talking about that here. She divided making a course into thinking about it, writing it, filming it, and editing it, which is 4 different categories. And then creating it, publishing it, and promoting it are 3 different categories. 4, 3. I'm not doing any of that. I'm assuming you figured out those things. We are only going to talk about ways of creating engagement or interaction when you are actually hosting or watching a recording of what the webinar content is. So I usually have a title page, and then specifically if there's CEUs, you need to have learning outcomes and a description often in the recording. So I just put it in when I'm live. It's also kind of an agenda, for lack of better words. So we're going to be doing this in 3 parts. So the first, naming what the problem is. The problem is that you've come to a low tech person to learn how to use tech. But you get what you pay for. So low tech, no fancy microphone, no fancy cameras. Obviously, this is not the fanciest background. I did move my giant pile of books though for you, just so my shelves looked a little nicer. I have a very nice mural over here that I have used in the background before, but the computer and the shelves thing didn't work because I'm a hoarder of books. We're going to talk about what to do before you are actually like live with an audience. So kind of what I have done up to the point that there was now all of a sudden an audience. Then during the course itself, what are things to be thinking about? The question I think you should be asking yourself is, if you were taking a defensive driving class online, what else would you be doing while you are taking that class? Because ultimately that's what you're competing with. And then after you've done it, your client is going to want some things, and you can make those available or even upcharge for those things. And then lastly, the last 20 minutes or so, I'm actually going to have a practice activity that we will do that hopefully will work because it's specific to this webinar. But we will do something and you will need a pen and paper. So that's the last 20 minutes. And you can do it on the recording as well. And then at the end, question, text, whatever I can possibly help you with. As a flaming extrovert underemployed for day 4, it's just nice to have like a job and to work. The interesting thing I think that I hear all the time that is the hardest about engaging in interaction on webinars is that we as the speaker don't have input, right? So like I've disabled chat, no one has texted yet, y'all are all muted. And we're used to being able to interact a little bit more. And so ultimately what it comes down to here is that you just need to be able to know your content, know when people will probably laugh or when they need to write, and learn how to shut up and keep a timer. That's like the hardest part. So that's pretty much what I'm checking my notes, which you're also not supposed to do, but I've never done this webinar before. When you're setting up your Zoom, Zoom settings, one good tip is to have a redirect domain that goes to your meetings room. So mine is Inner Oval, like inner circle, except it's not perfect. InnerOval.com. That is to my Zoom room for meetings. Webinars, you can't really do that for, but people get really confused sometimes with all the numbers. You can also auto-correct, face correct in your settings, which I don't know what it does, but it like cleans up your face and your complexion and the coloring and stuff, and it's free. You can automatically set up mute all. in meetings. And then for webinars, you have to elevate people to panelist, or like I did, I clicked on everyone you're allowed to speak, and then I've asked you to mute your microphones. And if you are doing this with someone else or not, you can automatically set up that only a host or a panelist can share their screens. So then people aren't messing with your own program. Okay, that is like before, and what we're doing today. So before, there you go. So the other thing that I have done is I've created slides to kind of show people where we're at in the program. Specifically if people are watching the recording, or again, we are trying to encourage engagement and interaction. So if I'm watching the recording and people live were actually engaged, then that might make me more engaged. But if you're multitasking and doing a million different things, then I'm trying to give everything I can to the participants to like maybe multitask at least on a different device so that my visuals and my images are up on their screen. So I'm competing for their attention, but I don't want a passive participant because it's not good for learning, but it also is not really good for that recording. The Harvard Business Review actually had an article on March 9th that was about like adult learning inside of these things. And one of the hardest piece is moving from passive participant to actual engagement. So here's little tricks and bells and whistles that I do that have significantly increased the amount of engagement in real time when people are even watching the recordings or live. So you'll notice on this slide, I have the section before, I have a fun question to think about, I have my texting number, and then the little squares in the corner are actually our progress chart. So as we move along, they will fill in so then people know like how and where we are in the webinar. Again, if they're watching the recording or something, they can pause when they know that they see a slide like this because we're starting a section. Okay, so before. So if you are in the Speak and Spill group, I added these two pictures just in case you're super new to Zoom. I am not good at everything. Go to somebody else who's an expert in Zoom, but this is what I do that currently works. So when you're setting up a Zoom webinar, you'll notice the little markings. I think my mouse works. So this recordings link is where all the recordings will hide later and you can find them. Oh, it moved. Then I enabled Q&A. And I enabled the recording to the cloud. This morning, I changed it so that I could also have a practice session. And then I changed it not to go to the cloud, but then that screwed up somehow. I don't know what happened, but that's what I did. And then below the fold is this information. So when you are doing this with a client, I always make the client an invited panelist. They will have a special link, but then they have the controls for everything, which we'll talk about later. There's also things that you can do that are email settings, branding specific to the client, pre-questions that they fill out when they register if you have registration required. And then the live streaming, I am too chicken to do this, but you could live stream your webinar at the exact same time if you wanted to, which yesterday NSA did a town hall meeting kind of thing, and it was live on Facebook and on Zoom at the exact same time. There's usually about a 5 or 10 second delay, so that's an option. Okay, so then for this particular webinar, I did not have registration required. So then this link is what I put in the invite that I shared with people, and that's what I shared. And it caps at 500 attendees. But what I typically find, especially with my clients who have large numbers, is one person registers and there's 1,000 people in the room. So then I get questions from all the participants, not just the person who has access to the computer. So that's another reason why the texting number is a really good idea. Okay, we just did that. Great. I already talked about Allison Graham. I'm getting ahead of myself. Zoom setup is already did. Bill Cates gave me great advice once about a microphone, and instead of screaming into the microphone, let the thing do its job. Same thing with Zoom. It has a lot of things that it can do, and just let it do it. You just need to play around in the settings and see what you want to do. Part of the course structure is what are you doing, right? We already talked about this. Title, learning outcomes, what's the agenda, what's the description, especially if you're going to apply for CEUs. Usually the client does this, or like I'm an Events Industry Council preferred provider for certified meeting planners. So then the descriptions and learning outcomes have to be exactly the same. When you start off, I always like to have the early sounded thing. We already talked about that. If you're going to do an interactive activity, so not just an engaging activity, but an interactive activity, make sure you know what supplies you're going to be needing. I'll show you an example of that. If they need pen and paper, at the very beginning, I tell people they need pen and paper. And then as we go, before we start the activity, I mention it at least 4 or 5 more times. I make a joke, if you're on a treadmill or in a car, you're welcome to think about these things. But you might, if you're listening to the recording, you might want to pause this and do it again when you're at the desk. And then I'm really careful how I word the directions because people may be driving. Engaging folks who are watching the recordings, I think the hardest part is just remembering that they're there. So you describe what all your images look like. You talk to people as if you're in a passenger in a car with them to describe what it is that they are looking at, because they're not paying attention, they're doing something else. Other things to do ahead of time is thinking about your slides, your handouts, etc. Some clients mandate ADA compliance. The state of Washington, it's called 508 compliance. There's a lot of free webinars that you can watch on how to make your slides compliant. I am not awesome at this, but you need to think about it in advance. Progress of images, we talked about the square. Practice run-throughs, that's a lot easier to do until all the attendees show up, and then you find out what you forgot to do, like enable the chat room. I also have 3 giant dogs, and so I try really hard not to schedule them until after the mail usually comes, because then it's Armageddon in the house. Jobs is particularly important. So most of the big webinar clients that I have, we do a webinar a month. I get paid nicely to do this, and I actually delivered one yesterday morning, which is super helpful because this is stable income right now for me, because obviously I'm not keynoting anywhere. So I really want to do a good job, but depending on the clients, they use a different platform. Sometimes they want to move the slides, sometimes they're in charge of the recording. So it's really important for you to be very clear who is going to move the slides, who is going to monitor the chats or the Q&A or the Twitter hashtags or something. I recommend having, if I use my Google Voice number, which I do pretty much for everything, then I give them my direct cell phone number. So we have a back channel if something happens. And who is going to be doing tech support? So I ask this question, even though I absolutely despise asking for help, because if something goes wrong, I don't want them to think I'm going to fix it. My job is to keep the show going on. No matter what happens, my job is to do this. So when I did a webinar at a United Lounge in Denver, remember sitting in airport lounges? Who knew I would miss yogurt so much? Anyway, when I was there, obviously all the tech was melting down, and I was able to just keep going with the flow until eventually I was using, just like this setup, a mic and the camera that was on my laptop. My headphones broke. Their internet was going down, like all kinds of weird things were happening on their end. And I was able to just keep the run of show correct with the content. 1, that's good for the recording. And 2, you should know your content well enough that you don't need any of that stuff. And the people who are calling in from their place, they can listen at the worst case scenario about what it is you're doing. But you need to know who's doing what job first. Knowing your shit. Having a landline phone, which is like super old school, but this is also a good back channel if something were to happen. I don't have that in a United Lounge, but if I'm at home, I do. I also have an Ethernet connection right now, which is like the old school plug-in, and the back channels. And then welcoming and setting up people. As people were coming in before we got started, I introduced people to each other. I said hello to people. If you're doing a meeting, that's a good time where you can actually go and like rename people who call in on the phone what their name is. I do it on paper, or like right now I can see the attendees on a list. That's important because you can call people out, say, you know, like, Ted, what are your thoughts about this, etc., to break the ice when we get to Q&A, which is also more engagement. You never know when I'm going to call on you, so you have to pay attention. So getting that all set up is the super before. So you'll notice that one of these little squares is filled in. So we have now moved on, turning the page. You'll also notice I printed out the PowerPoint so that if something goes wrong, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I can then mail them the slide deck, and it's still engaging and still interactive, even though it's being piecemealed together because of tech problems. Okay, so during the actual webinar, which is what we are currently doing, normally I would not talk exactly this much, but that's not always going to happen. Setup wise, I prefer to have my computer and the PowerPoint over here so that I can see what's happening, but I can make eye contact with myself because people are watching the camera. So I either usually have a mirror above the camera, or I put my eyeballs right underneath the camera so that I'm making eye contact with myself because I'm a narcissist, aren't we all? When you're sharing the PowerPoint, it can block out both screens, or you can share it just one screen so you keep things separate. That's nice. During the actual one, because you now know who is on and what their names are, if you're doing a meeting versus a webinar, I usually keep that on paper. Also, what's important is when we start talking, I'm a diversity person, for those of you that don't know my topic area. So people of color, women, different people who have different delays as far as like older internet or slower internet may actually be, for a number of reasons, less likely to kind of step up or volunteer. And so it also helps me with the dynamics of the group and making sure that I've like called on everyone and that everyone's participating in a way that they want. If they don't want me to talk out loud, they can text message at any time, but I can also call on people to make sure that all the voices are being heard. That's important. This particular slide is just an example. You'll see it a number of times during this deck, but if people are multitasking, they're not going to remember my texting number, even though it's like on the footer of all the slides. They're not looking at the slides. So then this is a reminder to me to say, like, don't forget to text message if you have any thoughts or comments or compliments. Thank you. I've already gotten a couple compliments, but they can text message those, and that works. It also is just my contact information, which of course you would want them to have. It's a reminder to call an attention that, by the way, you are an actual participant in a webinar. Close some of your windows down. So it's a reminder both ways. Okay, so now we're going to get to like actual techniques. I know some of you were like, we're 23 minutes in. I didn't tell you how long it was going to be. So first, because I have to talk about history and terms and things like this, I'm not fancy. I do not use transitions very well. I don't really know how to use PowerPoint either because I never use PowerPoint. So I'm going to show you an example that I do from one of my programs. So it's out of context. It's part of a diversity training where I have to talk about the process of time. So this is how I do it. I start talking about when I was in college, I first learned about pluralism. And then as I move forward, I'm talking about the different words and how we ended up where we are now. I say the words as a progression, but even that tends to be more engaging, and I almost always get a text or something in reference to like, oh, I remember when that word was more popular, or what word do you think will be next? Sometimes those things can happen and they're not even planning, and they start having a discussion in the Q&A or on Twitter hashtags, and I'm not even paying attention to that. Hopefully the client is. But that's already started a conversation. So now people are already engaged just because I did this with my slides. But it names the multiple terms, the multiple starting places, and is kind of like an equalizer. And all I did was each one of these is its own slide, right? So that's a slide. And then I just cut and paste it and make one smaller and one bigger until we get to the end. That one I call the time piece. Discussion items. I don't think I'm going to do this today just because my internet's been acting weird, but Zoom webinar, you can break people into their own breakup groups by clicking a button. I've only done this a couple times because I'm super nervous about doing it, but you can set up a discussion item by describing a picture, ask some questions, and then your job is to shut up and let them talk. So I use a personal timer, which is usually my cell phone or a clock that I have. So I might tell them that they have 3 minutes to have the conversation, and then I pull it together in 2 minutes. I might tell them they have 2 minutes and they get 3 minutes, depending on what kind of tech needs are needed, especially if something's going wrong. It's a great way to do it. So this is a discussion slide that I usually do where it says, what do you see? What is the story you write? Fill it in here. And what if you're wrong? So some of you are familiar with my just leave room for edits concept. So this is a picture of my brother-in-law who is an amputee. He was in a boating accident. This is a picture of him with his legs hanging over the edge of a cliff. So we start talking about assumptions. We can start talking about stories that people write, or what this means, or what do they see, or what do they not see. But that can be a good discussion-y piece, and it's just from an unusual picture with a prompt of questions. Again, watching Twitter, watching the Q&A, watching my texting, I can see that people are engaged live, but on the recording, they still will be. Also, when you want to, you can always pull back in and be like, okay, so Jerry, I'm hypothetically doing this, you don't have to do this, but like, so, okay, Jerry, just out of curiosity, what story did you write? Okay, well, that's really good to know. Tony, what story did you write? Do you think you're right? Do you think you're wrong? So that's kind of a way of pulling in individual people too. Depending on how many people you have, sometimes you can't do that because you just have too many participants. Today, there's only 16 people on live, so you could, in theory, do it. But I don't know, maybe I will. Let's see how far I get along. I'm also allowing everybody to talk, and then I'm just going to ask that you mute your microphone if you haven't already. Okay, next technique, again, this is visual with PowerPoints of being engaging, is the zooming in and out, where you can divert or choose something to focus on. So again, this is just a visual thing. So some of you may remember this meme from Facebook, that all oppression is connected. It's beautiful. It went all over Facebook. It was gorgeous. So here's an image of it that I then describe in case people aren't looking at the image. Because I said, you may remember this from Facebook, sometimes people will stop multitasking and go look at the thing. So I talk a little bit about it. Also has my texting number still at the bottom. But then I'm zooming into that picture. So all I did was, it's the same picture. I just stretch the picture and recenter it to get them to what they're seeing. So there's a typo in the picture. So I talk about not being perfect and how it can still be pretty. Anyway, so focusing in the attention, they have to be looking at the screens. But if they're driving or watching the recording, I also have to describe what is happening. But that keeps the engagement up. Okay, toggling back and forth. One of my most popular programs is on conscious and unconscious bias. So I have to talk about positive or negative bias, and I often use optical illusions for this. And by using optical illusions, the famous one of a rabbit or a duck is what I will be using. So I usually have a slide that says, okay, before I move the slides, I want you to tell me what you see first. Just say the first word that comes to mind. And then I'll slide to the image. And then people will start chatting or on Twitter or texting me, duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit. And I'll say, oh, I see a rabbit too. But now I see a duck. Usually I can make the transitions between these two slides a little more obvious. I forgot to do that in the settings here, but I'm actually moving slides and flipping them back and forth, or maybe I don't paste it exactly right so they can tell I've switched slides, but that helps them figure out how to see both. Anyway, so that's another kind of toggling back and forth. It's kind of like highlights, like what's different in this picture. Being able to like go back and forth is another PowerPoint technique. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to text message me. Here's my contact information, just as a reminder. And I also would use this as a reminder, and am actually going to do this now, to see if there's any Q&As that are happening. I accidentally disabled the chat room because I'm awesome and I couldn't figure out how to re-enable it once we got started. So I don't see any Q&As currently. Let's see if I have any texts. This is also a really great time to lie if you have any questions or texts, because it prompts more people to do things. So if you're not at home, have you used Bluetooth earpods, or do you only use a wired headset? Great question, Ted. I use my AirPods just to not annoy people if I'm in a lounge, but if I'm in a hotel, I just use this. So I have a MacBook Air. This is its microphone, that's its camera. I do not have anything fancy. So I could, but it's just more shit for me to have to pack. I did do a podcast and I don't even know where it is. Where is it? Nope, no idea. So I do have a headset with a microphone that when I interviewed on a podcast, they mailed it to me, and that was nice. And sometimes I travel with that one. I have one webinar in particular that there's almost 4,000 people on that webinar at any given time. So for some reason, I feel like I have to use the headset, but it's just one more thing to have to travel with. Okay, we have a text. Love the progression of terms slide. Yeah, the progression of terms, depending on your field, maybe that's something you need to do, but it goes with time, and it also is the evolution of the language that's using or something. So that's kind of a fun one. Okay, I don't see any more, so we will proceed. I talk really fast, but I'm doing this extra fast because I want to make sure we get to everything. Okay, so also, you know how it is when it's like new content, like I've never done this before. I don't see Q&A, I don't see text, and building. Okay, oh, I know what this one is. Okay, so when one of the times I want to make a point about how complex something is, or all of the excuses that everybody always comes up with, if you think about what you do in person, when you would like solicit, all right, so what do you use a can of corn for? And then everybody in the audience would say like, well, I do this with it. I do this with it. I hate this with it. I do this with it, right? Like that kind of activity in person. So instead of doing that in person, because sometimes you then have to monitor the chat or the hashtags or text or whatever, you can just talk it through. So you can ask a question, and then as you're talking, I will be moving the slides, adding to an image of all of the answers that are typically given, right? Now, somebody somewhere is going to text me some other answer they do with a can of corn. That's fine. But this is the typical answers. So you're kind of giving the answers away. So who suffers the most in a scenario where judgments are limiting you is the question. Okay, so who suffers the most? And then as I keep talking, I might talk about people with social identities, economic class, educational access, etc. But I'll do it again so you'll notice. So here's who suffers the most, the one person. And then I layer in all the different things that are coming just by, all this is adding circles that are different colors until I get to the answer of why being the person who has to do all the education is actually why they suffer because of all of those other things. And then I have a texting number if people would like to add something. So again, it's engaging and it's like feigning the interaction, if that makes any sense. But I get comments specifically on this piece in this particular webinar. I get comments all the time that like, I felt like you were in my office having a conversation with me, when in reality, I totally was not doing that. So Mike Domish, you have raised your hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, so people use PowerPoint all different ways when trying to use Zoom and struggle. You operating within a window, but
Mike, I can't hear you. I think you're going in and out.
Oh, it was cutting in and out?
I think so. Okay. You are permitted to talk. It's currently muted, but I'm going to assume something's going to happen. Or you can text message me. Oh, we got another one. Can you please repeat your point about toggling? Sorry, I didn't understand it. Yeah, so the toggling one is the duck rabbit, and I screwed it up because the image is exactly the same on both slides. So to you, it doesn't look like I'm changing slides. So I would have like the duck rabbit like this, and I would say, yeah, I see the rabbit. And then I would take the same picture on PowerPoint, change its size, and then maybe tilt it a little bit or do a transition to it or add a dot in a different place or something. So if this was the duck, then I'd move to the next slide so it would look like this. And I would say like, yeah, now it's a rabbit. So that the image looks different and I'm saying that it is a duck rabbit. And so toggling back and forth, they would be able to see the same image in two different ways, which in person, that's what we're doing anyway. But in a webinar, you can use the advancing and the going back of the slides if the image is a little wonky or off center or something like that, but I didn't do it right. So, okay, thumbs up. Mike, did you figure out whatever internet situation you want to ask your question? Okay, I don't hear you now at all. Maybe you'll text. Okay. Oh, there you are, allowed to talk. Okay, Mike, you are allowed to talk. What's going on? Well, now I just promoted you to panelist, I think. Ooh. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Great. Fun facts is, let's talk about this because I've been watching a lot of webinars in my underemployment, and it is both annoying and completely understanding when the host of the webinar is like talking about the chat or like vocalizing out loud what's not going well. It's annoying to watch that if it doesn't involve you, but when you are watching the recording, it is also helpful to know that you haven't missed something, like there's a tech problem that's happening. In an ideal universe, there would never be a tech problem. But when there is a tech problem, I find the easiest thing to do is just to like admit that there is a tech problem and go from there and see what is happening. Okay, so Damish, you are now permitted to talk. You are muted, but if you want to ask your question, you can try or you can text me.
All righty, we're going to try this again.
Oh, perfect.
Now you're hearing me fine. Okay, so I was saying that a lot of people use PowerPoint different ways when in Zoom, and many people struggle. So there's two questions related to this. One, you appear to be using your PowerPoint within a window without taking over the computer. So one, how do you do that? Two is, are you able to move back and forth and wherever you want to go within PowerPoint? Sometimes Zoom and PowerPoint struggle with control. That was it?
Yep. Okay. So I can totally move. Full disclosure, I have struggled all through these webinars of figuring out how to, I have a screen here so I can see my face. I have a screen here of the participants, and then this monitor is the PowerPoint. So what I had been doing before I figured out something I did today is I had a different screen with the PowerPoint over here logged in as a second user. And then that computer was muted, but that was the PowerPoint slides. So I would like advance them over here while talking about this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I also learned, because I don't know anything about PowerPoint, it would take over all my screens. And so
Right.
what I would do is just share the second desktop instead of the PowerPoint. And then you would see the column of slides off to the side, which I guess somebody somewhere thinks is unprofessional. I like to think that maybe it looks like another one of those progress things so they can see how they're going along. But it didn't block my screen. So like, that's what we did. Today, I was screwing around trying to figure out how to give you directions, how to do that, and realized I really don't know what I'm doing, so I don't feel comfortable giving you directions. But I found a thing that shares the PowerPoint, but when I went to like set the show up, because again, I hardly ever use PowerPoint, I set it up like a, what did it say? Like a booth or a vendor?
A kiosk.
So it's just the desktop. Like,
I
I didn't even know that was a thing until I was getting ready for this webinar, and it seems to be working lovely. I will tell you that I cannot see what you are seeing. I can only see my slides on this monitor and my face on this monitor on that second Zoom window that I never knew what its point was. When I do the recordings, which we'll talk about afterwards, but I'm jumping ahead, you'll have the choice of downloading different kinds of recordings, which could be the speaker, it could be the shared screen, etc. And then I always download it to QuickTime, and then I upload it to YouTube, assuming it's the right video that I want, because I don't know how to do video editing, right? And then it's on YouTube as unlisted, and then I give that unlisted link to the client. That was a lot more of an answer than what you asked. Does that help?
Yes, yeah, and you're referring to setting it up as a kiosk. I think that's what.
Oh, that's the word. Boom, 2 points for you. Yes, I did that today, and it seems to be working.
Thank you very much, Jess.
You're welcome. Okay, so we are going to keep going because we have one more, two more little examples, and then I was going to do a practice round. So we're probably going to go a little bit over the hour. Hopefully it won't kick us off. Okay, so the next version is a build. Okay, so again, my premise is you can do anything online with 0 human beings talking to you if you have done it enough times in person. Okay, so another program that I do talks a lot about trans-related issues. So sex, meaning anatomy and biology, gender, sexual orientation, how does sexism and heterosexism fit in? It's a whole thing. So I have a model. So when I do this in person, I ask people to like fill in the blanks. So when I do it as a webinar, I just copy the same slide over and over again, adding one word at a time. So then when I'm talking to them, depending on how much time I have, I might ask for some suggestions, but usually I don't have time for that, because if I did have extra time, I would want it to be in the application or the Q&A. So I'll run through things. So I might say, like, when I normally ask this, this is what people say, bink, 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 bink. I might say, in the example that I'll use is, you can let them chat or text or something, or you just give them the answers. So when I'm, let's see where the next one starts. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Go. Okay, so we have filled in sex, we filled in gender, now we're on sexual identity. So I would say, there's obviously like webinar before this, I just took this out. So, okay, now let's talk about sexual identity. You may be more familiar with the term sexual orientation, but first, let's start with heterosexual or straight people. You don't have to out yourself, but that counts as a sexual identity and a sexual orientation. It's not usually one that we think about, which is why I always like to write it down first so that I remember. Now, what are some others? Some of you may be thinking about gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, queer, asexual. I add an ellipse because I haven't checked Facebook in an hour. But those are some of the different labels we use for sexual identity. Okay, end scene. Does that make sense how that built? While instead of soliciting answers from them, I'm giving them the answers. If they're watching, they will see the screen move forward with all the different answers. If they're not watching, which will be most people, they're listening and they're still getting the content, so who cares? So thoughts or comments about building? Questions? Oh, we have 4 Q&As. I should have changed the battery of my mouse. Come on. Where is it? Texting you from Canada could add up. Could you explain again why you prefer text to chat? I get that people watching the recording can engage, though that scares me. So good question, Claire. So first off, for the texting, I've actually done texting with people from all kinds of countries, and they usually are the ones telling me that it's the easiest thing to do. So I don't know the I don't know that it would charge anything, but according to you it would, so I guess it would. So first off, sorry about that. Didn't know that that could be a thing. I prefer texting because, number one, I can lie about the questions that have come in. So let's take the sexual identity one. I go through the whole list and I'll be like, hold on, we just got a question. Notice the slide is up after that part too. We just got a question. Jessica, why do you use sexual identity instead of sexual orientation? Nobody text messaged me that, but I know that that is a very common question I get in person. So then if I've set up the expectation that they can text me, I can present it as if one of them have asked me the question, the very common question I get asked. And so then here is your answer as to why I use sexual identity instead of sexual orientation. It also allows people to ask questions when they're doing the recording. So then they're actually getting the same experience as when they were on the live one. You can also theme the questions better or ask them out loud using better words than they might have done out loud. For me, it is very hard to navigate the Q&A, the chat, the hashtags, and the text at the same time. So usually I have one job assigned to the client who is a panelist, that they're in charge of that. So when the screen comes up, I'll say, Claire, since you're monitoring the chat room, I'm going to check my texts and see if we have anything. While I'm doing that, can you theme and notice it through the comments? Are there any thoughts or comments that came in? So then I'm over here, I could make up a question or I could read a real question and then see what the client has themed to tell me. Now notice the client gets to pick and choose now what to send me or what to say out loud. And she's probably, usually a woman, she's probably not going to say something that's offensive to her. So then if the person gets mad that they didn't get selected, then they'll text message me and I can reword it. So it's actually less scary, to me at least, than some of the other options. I think because I came from, everything just disappeared on my screens. I think because I came from the college market, I am a little too leery of what would happen from real live. Everyone can see the chats. Anybody can text anything they want to. That is too scary for me because I've had too much experience of that going terribly wrong. Because they could text me at whatever time they choose to watch the video. Yes, that is true, but I use a Google Voice number. It goes to Google Voice and it's on my phone. And then when I look at my phone, I answer it. I also have no alarms on my phone, so it's always silent. Raja asks, they have a great question. WhatsApp is also a good medium. I have found a regional and an age cut about WhatsApp. Some people have no idea what it is. So just texting a number seems to be good. And then I set up the boundary of it being not my personal number, probably 10,000 audience members too late. So great questions. Anything else question-wise? I use the ellipse because I haven't checked Facebook in an hour. Somebody text message me. Yes, that's what I always say when I put that ellipse there because we're always creating new names for things. I'm going to bet that that's Chris. Okay, so let's see what else I put in here. I really need to change the battery. Okay, okay. 10:47, a little bit over my ideal budgeted time. When you are doing this, you should also, again, I've never done this content before, again, trying to give myself a break, but you can also leave time marks for yourself as to where you are. So if you need to, you can cut something out or tell a short story. You can keep track on the paper, not just what's happening over here. So if I know that I'm supposed to be at this part by 10:30, so I'm 17 minutes over according to my time budgeting. If tech problems happen, I now know that this is supposed to be 10:30 when I get to this slide. I look, I'm now 18 minutes over. I either need to make up 18 minutes, which would mean skipping this part, which I could do. I'm not going to, but I could. But then I'd be back on track of time, regardless of the real experience. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so clear directions. So we're not actually going to do this activity. I'm just going to show it as an example. Then I'm going to tell you what I'm doing after. Then we have a real example. If people can stay longer, that'd be great. And then I'm open to any other questions you have. That's a little agenda check-in. Sound good? Sounds great. Bonus of webinars is that you can't say anything. Let's see. Google Voice doesn't work in Canada either. Boo. Oh, Claire, I did not know that. I really did not know that. Okay, I'll have to figure something out. Thanks so much. Have to run. Watch the rest on video. Okay, fantastic. Okay, closing that down. Okay, so clear directions. So I am going to lead people through an activity right now. Not in real life, we're going to do the fast version. But in a workshop, I have Jerry and Tom. I know for sure you have seen this because you were in the room when I did it. But generally speaking, when I do this about stereotypes, I have 5 pieces of flip chart paper around a room. I divide everyone in the room into 5 groups. They get to know each other. They get a marker. They have the same color marker and they travel around the different groups and write whatever stereotypes they have, particular labels. And then in the processing, everyone in the group has a chance to say, ask questions, clarifications, definitions of something the orange group wrote on a certain word. Okay, so that's like the in-person version. So how am I going to do that as a webinar? So again, I think people are like, you can't do that. You can't be engaging. You can't be that interactive because they're watching it on a treadmill. Yes, you can. So you need to be very clear about what supplies you have. You need to be very clear about different formats. So these particular directions you're about to see, I give you directions of how to do this individually. I give you directions how to do this if you're watching in like a small group, because you can pass a pad of paper around the table. Or if they want, they can watch this as a whole group and actually have flip chart paper around the room. So let me show you how I do that. Okay. I often make jokes about interaction as well because I just say at least it's not role play. Okay, here by yourself, here are the directions. Here by yourself, grab a sheet of paper and divide it into 5 columns. If you're in a group of 10 or fewer people, grab 5 sheets of paper to pass around a table or the small group. In a large group, grab 5 flip chart papers, place them around the room, divide the group into 5 to rotate. Asterisks. You may not rotate all around the room to all the lists, and that's totally okay. So now you've given 3 different ways of getting supplies together and also monitored for time if need be. I give the same directions in person. Those are all different PowerPoint slides. Okay, come on, play along with me, because most of the people are by themselves, right? Or if they're in like a room of 300 people, they're not going to do this. And they just found out the directions if they're watching the live version. So it's they can't do, so now they have to do it by themselves. Okay, come along, play with me. 5 columns or pieces of paper, small or large, depending on your group size. Label each column heterosexual, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. I promise I talk about more things than just sexual identity. These are just the examples. Okay, so label each column a particular word. Okay, now you're going to spend a minute writing down anything and everything that comes to mind when you see this particular word under that column. Don't jump around. Write down nouns, adjectives, peoples, places, good, bad, anything. Doesn't matter. You're not going to show it to anyone. You're just making notes. Okay, then the first list, I'll say, okay, we're going to start with the heterosexual list. We're going to spend 1 minute doing it. I have my timer going. Okay, so then I'll say, okay, now that you're going to wrap up that one, we're going to move to the gay section. Okay, now, okay, now, okay, now. Okay, see, that wasn't hard. Now we're going to pay attention to each community one at a time. My ongoing joke there in person and in the webinars is that LGBTQ is seen as one thing, when in reality it is a wide variety of things. So we're actually going to spend some time on each column. That's the premise of the webinar. And then I go through each column and I tell them the patterns that likely showed up in the stereotypes that they wrote. Also notice how the bars move. So these is the rainbow, right? So then here's the heterosexual list, the gay list, the lesbian list. So the bars are moving left to right. So we know like when we're almost done, more progression stuff. But I give them the answers of the typical patterns that I see. Now, are there any thoughts, comments, or questions, right? So then that's kind of like the pause. And again, the texting, if you can use it in the right country, sorry about that. If you can do that, then you can engage in a conversation, whether they're watching the recording or live. Give them a solid minute for each of the things, which means you have to shut up for a minute. And that is hard because you've already been doing a webinar with no feedback and now you have to be quiet. But now what you have done, so now we've gotten interactive, and then the engaging part is that you're reading their minds by telling them what the typical answers are. You're giving them an opportunity to give you answers that weren't there. Okay, great, that's what the texting is for. And then you can actually go and process like you normally would in person, but it feels really customized and really personalized to the people in the audience at the time. So, works really great. Okay. Any thoughts, comments, questions at this point? Says 9. Let's see. Do you recommend playing music during silence? Great question, John. It depends. So I typically don't, largely because I'm so bad at tech that if I were to have to click on something else, I would be afraid that something else would leave. I do have some Spotify lists that are on my phone. So sometimes I'll play music from my phone if my phone is not logged in as a panelist. But generally, because it's only a minute, I might say like, you have 30 seconds to go. You got 15 seconds to go. Okay, now we're wrapping up that one so it's not silent the whole time. I also leave my microphone on so that if I'm talking or my dogs are barking or something, they can still hear my ambient noise to know that it's there. The practice one that we'll do, foreshadowing, it actually has a 5-minute space of time. So sometimes I play music in that. Depending on how y'all want to play, we might do the fast version. Great question. Okay, so I got another text. Do you have normal household bandwidth in your home? Has it been sufficient, and has it been affected by the increase in number of people now using bandwidth from home? So no, I live on a cliff, and you're not allowed to complain about living on a cliff because that's the ocean right there. I can see it. So you're not allowed to complain about how crappy my internet is, and it's crappy, and also directly impacted by sea lions. And yesterday we had killer whales in the bay, as well as an earthquake. So no, my internet is terrible. Zoom is usually been a million times better than Skype. It is very obvious to me that everyone and their dog is using Zoom. And at like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, it is very obvious to me that everyone in my little town is now streaming something on the internet. I use the Ethernet hookup instead of using just my Wi-Fi as a backup just in case. But right now I'm using the Wi-Fi, but I have the Ethernet if Wi-Fi were to go down. And I don't know, I think we're all just going to be doing that. So, okay. Hopefully that is helpful question-wise. Okay, so then after, you'll notice the progression squares, right? So let the thing do its job. So by having a enterprise version of Zoom because of my NSA membership, Zoom does a lot of stuff for you that your client, who's usually less techie than even I am, which is terrifying, how do they live? They don't know that I just hit a button and it runs a report of who attended, who registered but didn't attend, how long people were on or active in the webinar. They think somehow I'm doing that research. So it can be an upsell, but it can also be part of the sell as to why you would want to do a webinar in the first place. Let Zoom do its job. So it can run reports on attendees. You can also ask follow-up questions of people who attended, and same or different questions, their follow-up to the people who registered but didn't attend. I think I talked about this earlier. I'm starting to lose track of my mind. If the client is putting your material in to get CEUs, or the client has an evaluation, make sure that they do an outro with that information of how to do it. Because I am myself the CMP, for example, I have a SurveyMonkey link as the last slide in my decks that I do for certified meeting professionals. And if they go to that SurveyMonkey and they fill it out, then my assistant checks that once a month and turns them in for credit. If need be, run the reports. We already talked a little bit about recordings. There's recording versions of like which point you want. You can use File Viewer to download the transcript for free. It comes in like some gobbledygook thing that I didn't know how to use. So then you use File Viewer for free, open it in that, cut and paste the whole thing into a Word doc, and now you can use transcript. There's also audio files that you can use. And I also, depending on what kind of texts I get, I can give a report to the client about the theme of the questions I answered that they don't know about because they were monitoring the chat. Which then also reinforces the ones they were too scared to tell me about because they came over here. Because I control the recording on my Zoom, I can also look through the whole chat later to see what I missed. Same thing with the hashtags, and keep conversation going that way. If, kind of to Claire's point, if I get a text, and I have gotten some texts that are pretty frightening or scary, I immediately give at least their cell phone number to the client saying this person is in need, this person may be doing harm to themselves or others, or something like that. What is that? Oh, this is the activity that we're about to do. Okay, so I thought that I would try and pick like what I think is the hardest thing to do online. Okay, another person has to leave. Great. Okay, so texting, does the enterprise NSA version of Zoom include Zoom webinar? Yes, it does. So the Zoom meeting and Zoom webinar are all part of Zoom Enterprise, and you get a significant discount with your NSA membership, and it's unlimited minutes. It says capped at 500 people, but I don't necessarily believe it. And it also can be a limited of an hour, but I think we'll find out in 1 minute, but I think I toggled something that allows it to go as long as I want to, and it's unlimited cloud storage too. For those who don't use Twitter regularly, do you find there is much interaction on chat as there is on a webinar Twitter hashtag? So I barely know how to log into Twitter, so that's a good question to ask me. Usually the event has its own hashtag, and so I open multiple windows of Twitter for each of those hashtags to try to watch and see what's going on, but usually I engage afterwards. And it's usually the same people. The same people who use Twitter don't use the chat room. The people who use chat don't use Twitter, but now I'm engaging with both of them. Okay, so we're caught up on that. We're caught up on that. Okay, so I decided when I was looking back through my dreaded PowerPoints that I use for webinars, and I do use PowerPoints every time I use a webinar because especially if it's CE credits, it has to be exactly the same content. So then I make sure that I cover all the same things. I might use different examples, but I cover all the same content because of the PowerPoint. I do not use PowerPoint on stage in real life because I hate it. As you can tell, I'm already struggling. Okay, so I decided the hardest thing that I do in my personal work is self-reflection, taking responsibility for your own like collusion and participation and oppression. Again, I'm coming from a diversity place. So what I have done is I have created a process that allows them to personalize very difficult subjects that they don't want necessarily to talk about out loud, but will do it if I can give them a process to do it on their own that's confidential to themselves. They don't have to share it to anyone else. So I figured out a way how to do that exact same thing, but on a webinar. And I'm going to be really honest with you. Well, first time I tried this, I totally thought that it was going to flop because there's no way online people are going to be this self-reflective. And when they were, this actually released any fears I had about creating an online diversity program because I kept saying no, I didn't want to do it. But I was able to do it because I knew this activity worked well. So it is now 11:02. Most of you have not been kicked off. So this is the premise of the activity. So what I thought I would do is use the structure of this as the practice round, except you don't actually have to talk about your collusion and participation with racism or something. It's just going to be about what your thoughts about online programming. So if you are interested, we can go into the practice round. I think it will take 20 minutes or less. Let me do another check for any texts or questions. We're still at 12, no texts. So if we're going to do this, then I can show you kind of how I would go about doing the directions, how you would say this, and then you as a participant, how you would engage or stay interactive. But also imagining there are people who are going to be watching this recording, so then they would also benefit that it actually does work. It is both engaging, it is both interactive, and then after that we can just do more questions. So I see no objections. Someone is asking me to please keep going. Well, that just flattering, so thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going. So practice. Notice the squares at the bottom are almost done. Grab a pen and paper. I actually mean you. Unless you are driving or on a treadmill, then you are welcome to think about these things or pause and come back and watch this later when you have a pen and paper. But we're going to do a practice round for a particular activity. It is the whole piece of the activity, and then we'll open it up for discussion, which is very similar to a webinar that I would normally be doing. I've changed the prompts to be relevant to this conversation that we've already had. So everyone have pen and paper? I'm assuming you do. Okay, so here we go. This activity is called Messages I Learned. You're also welcome to steal it if you want to. You just pick different lenses each time. We can talk about that if you want. Okay, so this webinar that we have done is webinar engagement and interaction. So that is the lens that we're going to be thinking of today. So now, hopefully, you have my texting number, but if along the way you have any texts or comments or questions or anything, or something pops into your mind that you want to talk about, even if you're watching the recording, feel free. You are more than welcome to text message me at any time, 202-670-4262. Notice I also say that out loud because then they can rewind and hear it again if they're not actually watching the slides, they have the audio version or something. Okay, doing virtual work is a simple concept, but it isn't easy. While moving forward, we must also trace where we have come from and what we have learned. This activity is primarily a silent self-reflection journey through one's past to better inform our futures. Most of that wording is left over from doing social justice work, but okay. You will need pen and paper for the activity. Not kidding, you really do need pen and paper. You don't have to share it with anybody else if you're in the same room with someone. This is really just a conversation between you and your own lived experience. We'll be moving through 4 prompts and then we'll open up for a conversation. Again, you don't have to share anything that you record about your own life. I just want you to engage in a reflective activity with yourself. So take your paper and divide it into 4 quadrants. You can draw a plus or an X on the paper, either work. You don't need a ruler, doesn't have to be perfect. And then I want you to number each quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So draw a line, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So on your paper, you should have 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just in case you thought I was kidding, it's not too late. You're welcome to grab a pen and paper. We're going to do a reflective activity where you're engaging in a conversation with yourself, and then we'll open it up for whatever you want to share with the group. You don't have to share anything though. Okay, so we're going to go through each prompt one at a time. And side note for those of you, I will probably go through this a little bit faster just for time's sake. Okay. If I give you specific prompts, I will give you specific prompts and a countdown clock for you to make notes, draw pictures, and or reflect on the messages that you've learned about our topic and each guiding prompt. You don't have to share this information with anyone at any point during this program. Remember, it's not an art contest. This is more of an opportunity for you to bookmark different things that you have learned about our topic. And today, our topic again is engagement and interaction on webinars. Significantly lower risk than your interactions with racism. Okay, so quadrant number 1, I want you to spend time on messages that you have learned from all of your experience as an online instructor. So anytime you have taught an online class, what have you learned about engagement and interaction or the lack thereof, and what you are capable of doing, what you are not capable of doing from the online courses you have already facilitated? What have you learned? So give yourself some time, make some notes. While y'all are working, Claire asked, do I ever give the instructions in the chat? And I don't usually, because I usually have chat disabled. So I usually just say them or they're on the screen. I think my graphic designer made these slides, which is why they're so much prettier than my other ones. And I think my graphic designer actually used the timer on these to automatically fade to the next one, but I'm going to speed it up. So 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute remaining. And again, this is what messages you have learned from yourself as an online facilitator, as someone who's teaching a webinar, who's doing the instruction, things that you have learned about engagement and interaction. Okay, as that quadrant comes to a close, we can move along to the next quadrant, where you are always welcome to go back and add more if you need to, edit, do whatever you need to. So as we move to quadrant 2, I want you to do messages that you have learned about people other than you who have been an online instructor. So think about the webinars and things that you have participated in as a student, and what kind of things did you learn from them in reference to their engagement or interaction or lack thereof? What worked, what didn't work? This one starts at 4 minutes. I'll kind of rush it through a little. We have 1 minute remaining. Okay, again, we're doing the expedited version of this, but it's also significantly lower risk. As you're kind of wrapping up the quadrant about what you learned, one of the pieces that I often have to talk about is how binary we often are. So we have ourselves, and then we think we have everybody else. But the reality is that we only hand select some people to represent everybody else. So for the third quadrant, I want you to do more messages that you have learned about even more people. So in quadrant 2, more than likely you did just the online instructors that you either loved or you hated. So then I give you an opportunity to do some things, tips, techniques, ideas, opinions, things that you formed about other online instructors where you were the student or the participant that you probably left out in this kind of binary us-them situation. And this one I give you 3 minutes. We're doing the expedited version. We have 1 minute left. As you kind of wrap up that quadrant, we'll move on to quadrant 4. Remember, you can go back to any of the other quadrants that you want. This is just a conversation with yourself, a reflective conversation about messages you have learned from your own lived experience. So quadrant 4 is messages you've learned from time where you've colluded or participated in undermining interaction or engagement online. So sometimes this is actually the hardest quadrant. And that is, I want you to actually think about when you have either been a participant. I think it's easier as a participant, but maybe as an online instructor where you have shut down engagement, shut down interaction. Maybe you sat back as a passive participant, but you either colluded, which means you didn't change your behavior or encourage someone else's to change their behavior, or you actively participated in it not working. You again, I've had to change these prompts from like significantly more serious topics, but a time where you helped it not work. That's what I want you to write. Hopefully that makes sense. You have 4 minutes for this one. We'll do the expedited version. One minute left. Okay. So in theory, you have just had a very possibly challenging conversation with yourself about your own life. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to turn your paper over. For those of you that cheated along the way, you're welcome to get a piece of paper if you haven't yet. But most of you will have, and I appreciate your participation. Again, you don't have to share anything with anybody else you don't want to, and I just want you to turn your paper over. Go ahead, take a deep breath. If you need to, remember you can text me anytime you have questions or comments. Feel free, even if you're watching the recording and doing this alone at home. Okay, on the back side of your paper, I want you to draw another plus or another X. This will be much easier, I promise, and we're almost done. So go ahead and draw a plus and an X. The top two quadrants, I want you to label easy and hard. When you have easy and hard labeled, I just want you to take a moment and make some notes specific to this topic. What was easy about adding engagement and interaction, and what still seems hard about adding engagement and interaction to any of your online offerings? Take a moment, make some notes. You don't have to share these with anybody else. I just want you to keep the conversation with yourself going. What was easy and what was hard regarding, or what is easy, what is hard regarding engagement and interaction on online programs? After you finish easy and hard, because we're doing the expedited version, the next two quadrants is next and promise. When you have next and promise labeled, I want you to leave notes for yourself about what are you going to do next? And if you have any promises that you want to fulfill either to yourself or to your loyal fans, to your audiences, to your clients that are possibly in need or that we can be of service to right now. Some of us are being asked to do this. Some of us are going to volunteer to do this. But what are you going to do next? And what promises are you going to make to those that need you? When you're done taking those notes, breathe. Remember that we're responsible for all the messages we learn as well as those that we teach. We're also responsible to keep learning, unlearning, relearning, so that we can be the best teachers for others. If you need anything along the way, whether you're watching the recording or live, please feel free to text anytime you want, 202-670-4262. Find me on Facebook. I would recommend not looking for me on Twitter, but I suppose you could, just Jess Pettit. You can also send me an email at jess@goodenoughnow.com. That is my contact information, and I think what we can do is literally be good enough now and try our best at adding engagement and interaction to a webinar. So with that, I would like to open it up to the end. So hopefully that was a decent example of doing something very interactive at a given time for an activity. What I would like to do is open it up for like a conversation with the people that are left in the room, just to see what your thoughts are, what your fears are, how I can help, anything. So if you want to unmute yourself, you are welcome to. You're all permitted to talk. Happy to help. Claire, do you want to say something?
I was just, thinking through an exercise that I get people to do on their own, generally when in a workshop. And then I usually have a group conversation about that and then have people share something they learned. Do you ever open it up for that feedback or sharing whatever came out of the exercise? And if so, what format would that be?
Well, so the one that we just did, this is exactly what I would do. Is that whole thing takes about 15 minutes, maybe 18 minutes with the introduction, and then they are in silence. The client is usually freaking out because people are joining and it's silent, so the slides are really important. And then when we are all done, I ask them to breathe, and then I say, okay, let's open it up. So in the webinars that have more than 15 people, 20 people, if I'm using Zoom webinar, then it's usually just me and the client talking while we are reading through the chat and the texts. The ones where there are 4,000 attendees, it is only me and the client reflecting on the activity and then checking in with texts and chat. When it is a group this small, I just let everybody talk and we have a free-for-all.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I talk about such sensitive topics in my like normal work or whatever, people really get to pick and choose what they want to talk about or what they want to share. I find that specifically the highest privileged folks, this is the first time they've really sat down and been reflective enough because usually my prompts are around classism or religion and politics or disability or race or sexual orientation. So then they're really eager to talk because it is cathartic in some way. So. Other thoughts or comments?
Oh, curious what you see on your screen. Do you see all the participants, or what do you see in terms of who's participating?
Because I'm not using Zoom meeting, I'm using Zoom webinar. I only see myself. The slides are on that monitor and I have like a participant slip that I can switch between panelists and attendees. And so I only see a list of the attendees, but that's how I'm like allowing you to speak and muting or unmuting you, lowering hands, things like that. Because my mouse battery is about to die, because I'm super prepared, I am clicking on Q&A every time I notice the little number going up. But otherwise, I try to mostly just use my phone. So I'm checking my phone as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah, because now I understand how you're monitoring, and you get some sense of feedback and with respect to who's there. So that's good. Yeah,
I mean, I would say for me as super extrovert that would much prefer to be in person than online, 99% of the time I spend doing a webinar, I have zero feedback, zero noise, zero activity, zero texts, zero chats, zero Q&A. No one is raising their hand. No one is doing anything. And then when I open it up for the conversation, I might get like a trickle. I usually get a bunch of texts the next day because they're thinking about it or something. And then I give the client the recording, and then for the rest of my life, I could get one text message from the recording, but the client is super excited that there's all this interactive opportunity. They get scared at how interactive the directions and needing supplies and what's going on. And the people live tell the client that it's amazing, and the people who watch the recording tell the client that they love that it was so interactive and engaging.
Cool.
It's still like emotionally and energetically draining on me because I don't have that feedback.
I know. I'm thinking, like, I'm used to watching, you know, Scott and Allison's Facebook Lives now, and all the hearts coming up, and you just get the sense, and seeing the comments, and you get the sense that you're part of something with other people. And from my perspective, that's one thing that's missing from this, despite how fabulous the engagement is. You just don't get the other people's stuff.
Yeah. And I guess there's two pieces to that, right? One is right now, while we're all underemployed and quarantined in our homes, I'm doing webinars with other people just so that I can like think and meet and talk with other people. And everyone is doing like a happy hour or whatever their little area of expertise is. They're offering a webinar. So that's like fulfilling to me personally. But when I'm doing a webinar for a client, all I want, like, let's take right now as an example, right? So for the work that I had that was based on keynotes or in-person work, I immediately sent them all one Word doc page, one page that automatically extended our contract through 2021. We'll deal with the details later. I'm the least of your worries. Not a single person asked for their deposits back. Nobody has sent that sheet back, but I didn't get asked for my deposit back. But I have all this ongoing consulting work, right? And in my ongoing consulting work, I don't want them to not pay me now every month because of everything that's going on. And so being able to offer webinars that they find engaging and interactive and that their employees find engaging and interactive is keeping money coming in the door. So it's not engaging and interactive to me. It's soul sucking, but it is keeping money, and I'm getting a good reputation, and those clients will probably re-up their consulting gigs.
Awesome.
P.S. The mail is here now. Or UPS, somebody's here. I'm very well protected. Any other thoughts or comments? I hope this is helpful. I wasn't intended to be like fancy by any means. I'm like the least fancy person, but it is on. I mean, I would feel like a douchebag under normal circumstances saying this, but it is how I have stable income right now from my business. One thing I probably should have mentioned earlier, but now this will be like the Easter egg for people who watch the end of the recording. When I had that surgery that I was supposed to lay down for 6 months or something, I just did a search of my hard drive of all the PowerPoints I'd ever created because I hate PowerPoint. There wasn't that many. It was like 14, 15. I think there ended up being 16 because 2 of them I just decided not to do. So then I had these PowerPoints. So then I offered live Zoom webinars when I first got this. I sold tickets to a Zoom webinar-rama. I sold 0 tickets, but I went ahead and did them live so that I like was getting up and doing something while I was recovering from surgery. Sold 0 tickets, have all the recordings. So now I have an online workshop store on my website where people can buy these online things. Nobody really buys the online things. I mean, they may now, but they certainly haven't been. But what ended up happening was, and it doesn't cost me anything because I have everything just on unlisted YouTube and they're on hidden pages on my website. So I don't pay for a platform. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't keep track of anything. Nothing. It's just there. And what ended up happening was I had clients who saw that and they wanted to pay full fee for me to do it in person. Now, the rest of the website is about me doing things in person full fee. Why on earth was this hidden page that I offer these online content? Why was this the thing, the tipping point? I don't know, but it was. So I have gotten full fee work from having the online courses available where they've asked me to do them live, custom for them, and they get the recordings. Sure. And I've had people who then up sell themselves up by themselves, that they then want me to do more training or more keynotes for their organization. And it all started because I sold 0 tickets to webinars, but my webinars are really interactive. And I think that that level of engagement prior to quarantine is really unusual, specifically in my topic space. So I wish everyone really good luck. If there's anything I can do to be helpful, I am happy to be helpful, but I don't know anything about tech. I don't know anything about Zoom. I don't know anything about PowerPoint, and I don't know microphones and headphones and stuff. But I am making money in the middle of COVID-19 from doing interactive and engaging webinars. So it felt like I should probably tell somebody. But to practice my roll calling thing, Claire, do you have any other thoughts or comments since you can't text and I'm being countryist?
No, I just hope you saw I was clapping. You can't see that I'm clapping, but I'm clapping.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. I don't know how to make people's video work. Thank you, though. I appreciate that. Courtney, do you have any thoughts or comments? P.S. I'm calling roll.
I don't have any thoughts and comments. I'm sitting here in the doctor's office. I do not have coronavirus. It's just my regular immunologist, but I'm taking lots of notes. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Absolutely. Another roll call thing is you can also let people know who are up. So when I do, when I work specifically with clients, even in meetings or something, so I might say like, okay, Dana, you're next. I'm going to ask if you have any thoughts, and Ted, you're on deck. That way, one, they're like, oh, pay attention, and they can figure out the mute and the unmute and that kind of stuff and go from there. But then you're also have got 2 people in theory ready to go. Dana, do you have any thoughts or comments?
I had to figure out how to unmute myself. No, it's been great. I appreciate all the information. Thank you.
Absolutely. Dana reached out to me on LinkedIn, which might be even a worse avenue than Twitter because I don't know how to use either of these, but it worked and here you are. So exciting. Okay, Ted, you're up next. Tom, you're on deck.
All good. Thanks for hosting. Great information.
Thank you. Happy to help. Congratulations on the new baba.
Thank you.
Tom, I think I said you were next, which Jessica, if you're still here, I think you messaged that you had to leave, but something's still logged in. You're on deck. Tom, thoughts or comments?
I have to follow Ted Ma. He's like a legend. I worship the guy. I don't even know him, but I think he's cool.
He's great. He's great.
Yeah. So I actually watched this because I've had oddly 3 different people yesterday reached out and said, Tom, I need to start a podcast now. Can you get on the phone and tell me everything I need to do? And I thought, I'm going to watch Jessica's webinar thing. Maybe I'll do it once and let all the people do that at once. So I watched just because now I have to frickin' do one of these.
Yeah, welcome. Happy to help. Okay, Jessica, I don't think you're here anymore, but maybe you are, or at least one of your devices is. Okay, well, if people are watching the recording, I am about to stop the recording, but my cell phone number again is, or the texting number is 202-670-4262, 202-670-4262. Thank you very much. And everyone, yesterday I found my first little flash of hope, and I'm just gonna hold on to it like as if it is the last piece of pizza in a box. Y'all have a great day.